What's up, family? My name is Jimmie Scott Jr. and in this video I'm going to answer the question, why does God allow pain and suffering? So you may be watching this video right now and you might be going through some suffering and some hard times of your own, and you may be questioning God and asking God, why me? Or why is this happening to me? Or why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And I've noticed that that's the question that's been on a lot of folks' minds and hearts about the nature of God and why he allows certain things that he allows. So my hope is that as you watch this video and you listen to these points that I have, that you gain some sense of comfort and peace and understanding about God and the nature of God and how God works everything for our good and for his glory. I have some points that I want to go over with you, and I got these points from gotquestions.org. So if you ever have any questions of your own, you can always go to gotquestions.org. You can find this in the App Store or via web, and you can find some good commentary from this website in this app. My first point to you is human suffering exists because sin exists. When Adam and Eve disregarded God's command and ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the eyes of both of them were open. You can find this in Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. And death, along with all the suffering, came into the world. Sin and suffering entered the world because of Adam and Eve. So if you're not familiar with the story, Adam and Eve were the first couple in the Bible, and God had given them a command not to eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil and the knowledge of good and evil. He had commanded them not to do so because if they were to do so, then he told them that they would surely die. And because of the free will that God has given us as human beings, Adam made a choice to eat of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, having knowledge of good and of evil now. And so because Adam has knowledge of evil, Adam realized that he did evil against God because he went against God. He went against the nature of what God had originally created him to do, which was to live under his rule. Adam then followed his own desires, became prideful, and as a result, the downfall of humanity falling into sin. Because of this, their eyes were opened and death came along with them into this world. So sin affected humanity's relationship with God, with each other, and with the animals. Even the ground was cursed. We can first see here that the first question that we must answer before we are able to answer why does God allow pain and suffering is, where did pain and suffering come from? We must first understand that pain and suffering did not come from God. That was not God's original plan for us as humans, was to suffer and have pain. God created the world in beauty, and he found that everything that he created was good. There was no pain and suffering before sin. I want you to understand that God does not tempt us. As the Bible says, God does not tempt us, nor can God be tempted by anyone. So we cannot say that God tempts us. We cannot say that God makes us sin. We cannot say that God causes us to be evil. We can say that God allows pain and suffering, though, which we know, and we're going to answer the question as to why God allows pain and suffering. But we know that suffering itself did not come from God. Suffering came from sin, as sin entered into the world through Adam and through Eve because of the choice that they made to disobey God and go against God and the plan that God originally had for humanity. Sin opened the door for suffering because of Adam's wrongdoing. This is why we have pain in childbirth. This is why we have to work so hard just to scratch it and make a living of the soil of this world. This is why we have to continue to elevate as human beings in order to live in comfort in our lives and live in peace, working with one another and learning to love one another, because of sin and evilness. We've also ruined our relationship with animals. This is why there's a lot of evilness with animals. Since God is the first cause, he is responsible for the fact that suffering can exist. So we know that God can be responsible for suffering existing. Again, that's different than God being responsible for causing suffering. He did not cause suffering, but he is allowing suffering to exist, and he is the first cause to allow it because God created Adam and Eve knowing that they would sin. Remember that God is all-knowing. He knows past, present, and future. And so he created Adam and Eve knowing that they would sin and knowing what damage that would do to the world that he created. There is a redemption plan. God also created a redemption plan to go along with the sin that entered into the world because he knew that sin would enter into the world. He knew what Adam would do, even though he told Adam what not to do. But he allowed it to happen because he knew that there would be a redemption plan for it. Jesus is the only person that has entered into the world sinless. He took on all of our sin, died and defeated death to pay the penalty of the law, which was death, and rose again and declared all power in heaven and earth. God had a plan so that we didn't have to suffer in eternity. So there's a difference between the consequences of what we would have endured had Jesus not came into the world. Had Jesus not came into the world, then we would have endured eternal suffering, eternal pain. See, the pain and suffering that we deal with on earth is temporary because heaven and earth will pass away. There will be a new heaven and a new earth. You don't want to experience eternal pain and eternal suffering. God knows the fullness of human suffering in ways we do not, and yet he also knows the fullness of joy that redemption brings. God certainly allows suffering. Ultimately, he does so for his good purposes. Suffering is a direct result of sin running rampant. God ultimately does allow suffering, but he does it for his own good works and his own purposes. Humanity's sin, our sin, opened the door for Satan's rule over this world. And this is why sin runs rampant in this world. And suffering and pain is a direct result of sin. Some of this suffering and pain that we endure is a direct result of our own sin, of the things that we do. And some of this is an indirect result of the sin of others. This is where murders and mass murders that go on in the world, and molestation and child abuse and kidnapping and a lot of these different evil demonic things, they happen because of sin that has entered into the world. We suffer due to our own sins, the sins of other people, and the general fact of living in a fallen world. Often God allows the natural consequences of sin to play out. God does allow the natural consequences of sin to play out. I want you to remember this. If you don't remember anything else in this video, the rain falls on the just as well as the unjust. When it rains on good people and bad people. When natural disasters come, they tear innocent folks' homes and they also tear bad people's homes. I want you to go read the book of Job and look at the type of man and human that Job was, because God had considered Job as an upright man, a man full of integrity, a man that loved God, and yet he sinned. He also said that King David was a man that was after his own heart, and King David also sinned. Moses, the leader of the children of Israel that delivered the children of Israel out of bondage, God's chosen person that he chose and handpicked out of all of the people that he could have chosen, he chose Moses to lead his chosen people. Even Moses sinned. Suffering, no matter its cause or its precise type, is not an experience any would choose. But the more we come to know God and see his character, the more we understand how he can take even the hardship of suffering and work it for his purposes. Not only that, but we can share honestly with God about our struggles and even our doubts. We wonder why God allows a certain person to suffer so deeply through no fault of his own. Jesus offered a glimpse at an answer when his disciples wanted to know why a man was born blind. And you can read about this in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. They rushed to the conclusion that someone's sin must have caused it. So there was a man that was born blind in John chapter 9, and the disciples rushed to thinking that it must have been his sin or someone else's sin of his parents that caused him to be blind. And Jesus told him that neither he or his parents' sin was a direct result of his condition. It wasn't the sin, but rather this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Sometimes it takes suffering to enlarge our view of God so that we can understand who God truly is and how good God truly is. God allows us to suffer sometimes so that we can see his goodness and the things that he wants to do in our lives. We can see the direction that we were headed and understand that we were headed in a way of death, but we can receive life if we were to turn our lives towards God. So God allows us into our suffering. In Romans chapter 1, God allows us into our thinking, into our own desires, doing shameful things, as Romans chapter 1 says that we ought not do. Shameful things. God allows all these things because he allows the natural order of sin to play out. But because God allows suffering and pain does not mean that God is not good. Because God allows the rain to fall on the just and as well as the unjust does not mean that God is not good. It does not mean that God is not perfect. God has a plan. And as Christians, our goal is to always be looking towards eternity in everything that we do and everything that happens to us and everything that we say and everything that's said to us. Our goal and our focus is always to be pointed towards Christ for eternity. You must realize that you won't be on this planet forever. You must realize that the time that you spend on this planet living in this evil world must be spent wholeheartedly seeking Jesus and sharing the gospel and the good news. Because we don't have long. Life comes and goes like that. So it's important that we know of where our life is going. And it's important that we understand that we will suffer and that we will go through pain. Jesus suffered. Jesus went through pain. The Bible tells us very clearly, for you will have trouble in this world, but fear not, for I have overcome the world. Jesus himself has overcome all of the pain and suffering in this world because of evil. And he did so to show us as an example of how we ought to live in this world in order to be the light of this world. So why does God allow pain and suffering? God allows pain and suffering for his good and for his glory, to teach us and to show us his way, to guide us closer to him. We won't know all of the answers until we meet Jesus face to face, and until we see God's face, and until we are bowing at the foot of his throne. We won't know all the answers. But what I can tell you is that because we suffer, we will rejoice. If you suffer for God's name, you will also rejoice with God. God blesses those who suffer and go through things because we are his followers. Matthew chapter 5. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and talk about you and do all of these things against you because you are a child of God, because you exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. God blesses you when people mock you because you are kind. God blesses you when people talk about you because you live your life with integrity and doing the right things. God blesses you when people try to harm you and defame you and bash your name and try to do all sorts of evil against you because you are living according to the way that God has called you to live. God blesses you. And he told us to be happy about it and to be very glad. Pain and suffering even happens when we are being disciplined, when we fall and go in the wrong direction that God did not tell us to go in. God disciplines us and he allows pain and suffering, but it produces a harvest of righteous living so that we may be closer to him. When a good and sovereign God causes people to suffer, it is for their eternal benefit and his eternal glory. If he were helpless to stop suffering, he would not be God. If he instigated evil, he would not be good. But because God is sovereign and because God is good, he had a plan for us so that one day we wouldn't have to endure suffering and endure pain any longer. I appreciate you for tuning in and watching this video. I really hope this video helped you and blessed you in a way. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel so that you can get more videos just like these. And be sure to leave me a comment down in the comments section and let me know your thoughts on the video. I pray nothing but blessings and peace over your life as you continue to walk with me on this Christian journey. I'll talk to you next time.